You're listening to The Other 50%, a Her Story of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. Our presenting sponsor is the end-to-end production solution GreenSlate. Whether it's start paperwork, time cards, purchase orders, or reports, everything is digital, everything's on the app. You can work from wherever you are. You can work on your phone. The future is actually here. If you'd like to hear this pitch in person or see it for yourself, call me as I'm working there. My number is 310-789-2001, extension 323, or julie.walker@gslate.com. For today's episode, I spoke with Heidi Nell. Heidi is a person who is living her mission on purpose. She is the executive director of Good Films Impact. She previously served as the head of the Raben Group's Impact Entertainment division, where she provided pro-social consultation to leaders in media, entertainment, and philanthropy. Her clients include AFI, the Fledgling Fund, One Community, PBS, Sony Pictures, and YouTube, as well as independent filmmakers, artists, and changemakers. With nearly 2 decades working in entertainment, advocacy, strategic communications, and public engagement, Heidi is a leader in the social impact field, with unique insight and expertise in advancing cultural and policy change through stories and film. Her issue area expertise includes criminal justice reform, immigration, sexual assault, and gender and racial equity. She began her career at Ghost House Pictures and at Lionsgate Entertainment, and she was a partner at Picture Motion, where she led the Washington, D.C. office. In addition to her work on Just Mercy, through the development of the Represent Justice campaign, she has led impact strategy and successful engagement campaigns tied to many award-winning films: Batkid Begins, The Best of Enemies, Food Chains, just to name a couple. This was a great conversation and such important work that she's doing, and we really talk about the power of story to change people's minds and get people to really take action. You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, and the merchandise. Listen on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places. And also the full season of Catch a Break, the insider's guide to getting into and navigating Hollywood, is now available on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places, and on our website, catchabreakpodcast.com. Go check that one out and get up to date because we are working on season 2 right now. Okay, here's my conversation with Heidi Nell. Have a listen. What do you do?
What do I do? I use film and art and stories to inspire people to take actions that lead to long-term change.
That is the most delicious job description I've ever heard. Okay, tell me where you currently work.
So I currently am the executive director of a nonprofit called Good Films Impact. And Good Films Impact is the sister nonprofit arm to a film finance company that produces films. And so the first film that they have on their slate is Just Mercy. And Just Mercy is this incredible film based on the book, the New York Times bestseller by Bryan Stevenson, a human rights lawyer who has spent his entire career providing legal representation to people who are either wrongfully convicted, like they actually didn't do the crime, or individuals who I say are wrongfully convicted because they don't have the resources, the influence, the power, the access to means to get the representation that they need to not face overly harsh and extreme sentences.
Great.
Yeah, so that's like the film side. Mm-hmm. And then on my side, I work with advocates and philanthropists and artists and entrepreneurs to sort of like use that film and the story to engage audiences and harness all of the energy that comes out of the theater, right? When people are like amped up, they've seen a story, they understand the injustice and the corruption in the system, and they want to do something. Yes. And so that's what we do.
Very cool. So then what would those sisters projects be? How would you call people to action?
In this one in particular?
Sure.
Yeah. So this one, we're really galvanizing people through shared values. So I think there are certain films where it's like got a specific ideological viewpoint, and then you move people in that direction. What's really exciting about this story is it's about fairness, right? And like, everybody wants to live in a fair society or have sort of be in environments where things are fair, and that's not our justice system right now. So it's engaging people through this shared value of hope and redemption and the possibility of second chance. And then the types of actions that we're asking audience members to take are to sort of get engaged in the conversation, to represent justice in their own community. And for different people, that looks different ways. In, the majority of states in America, you can call your governor to make sure that your state is not enforcing the death penalty. Like, you have a say in abolishing that. Only 20 states in America have abolished it. There are DA races and judges being elected all the time, and some really important races coming up in 2020. And I think most of us don't realize that 90% of those positions are electable, and the amount of power that those individuals wield when they're making decisions and sentencing decisions for individuals.
And when we go to vote, we just see the list of names. We don't know anything about them.
Don't really know. Yeah, so getting people really proximate to the issue and then connecting them with activities and opportunities for action that they can take. And some of it is sort of like directed to policy change, right? Like if you're calling your governor or you're looking at, okay, who am I voting for? What judges or what DAs are on the ballot this cycle? And some of it's more cultural, like sharing stories, encouraging people to share their own stories of injustice in their communities, using art as a tool for healing for individuals who have been negatively impacted by the system, and just elevating the voices of system impacted individuals and making sure that as a society and as communities, we're treating people with the dignity that we all deserve because we're human.
How did you come to this work in the first place?
Oh, goodness.
Go way back.
Way back. So I was an artist first. I went to Performing Arts High School. I majored in modern dance.
In New York?
In North Carolina School of the Arts.
Oh.
Yeah. And I've always, since I was a little girl, we grew up in South Africa in the 80s, right? So early 80s during apartheid, and could very clearly see that there was a difference because of the color of my skin. I'm a white woman.
That must have been formative, living there then.
Formative. And, like as a little kid, you were like thinking about what apartheid means, what the definition is, what the socioeconomic sort of underpinnings of that are. But certainly you are aware of you have something because of the way you look, and other people who look differently than you don't. And so that sort of always informed my opinions. But one thing that stood out to me as a little kid is how I could be with so many different people who didn't look like me and have shared experiences through dance and through music, and how art really kind of like transcends these barriers. It transcends language barriers and cultural barriers. So that's always been something that I think I've been organized around as an individual. And then at different iterations of my life, it's sort of like, I just chiseled away and got closer and closer to using that as a tool to make change, and then doing it professionally. So not just as a hobby.
So what was your first job in this? Like, how did this go from something I want to do to I'm going to have a job? I
left Los Angeles in my early 20s when a boss of mine at Ghost House Pictures, before it was acquired by Lionsgate, I was his executive assistant. He said, you always care so much. You say you care so much about social action, but you don't know jack about politics. And if you ever want to make a real difference, you'll learn. And so he gave me credentials to go to the Democratic National Convention in 2008, right? Like the year of hope and change.
Amazing.
And I went, and it was amazing, and I had my Hillary signs, and then I had my Obama signs, and then I came back to LA from Denver that year feeling like, man, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, this isn't it for me.
Yeah.
Like working at, I think by that time I was at Lionsgate doing marketing, which was great, but like marketing horror films didn't feel like...
Wasn't feeding your soul.
It didn't light me up. And so knew that I wanted to make a change. I think this is actually kind of interesting. I haven't thought about this in a while. I think at those sort of moments for change, we're wired to think in a certain linear fashion, right? So I did marketing for films at Lionsgate. And so then I kept thinking, well, maybe I want to like do marketing for TV, not films. Or maybe I don't want to do marketing anymore. I want to work in production, like be on set, be more sort of like hands-on. And I met this woman who did these things called personal clarity statements.
Ooh,
kind of fascinating.
nice.
And
Very LA.
very LA, right? I tell people in DC and they're like what?
Whatever.
California.
Yeah, we eat that up here.
Love it. It was actually a big game changer in my life. So I sat with her for 3 hours, and you think in this 3-hour conversation, you're going to come out with clarity.
Sure.
Sure.
You paid a lot of money for that, I bet.
I mean, I was like, a young, low-level staffer at the time with little money. So like she did a pro bono situation for me, which was kind. I kind of thought I'd walk out of there with more direction. Like maybe I want to go focus on women and girls and work in advocacy or, whatever it was. And instead, she left me with these 4 statements. So the first statement was sort of like what you're hardwired to do. Put in any scenario anywhere in the world, what would you like just sort of naturally do? And mine was generate opportunity and create connections. And then the second was the audience that you have to be directly influencing through your work to feel fulfilled. And for me, that was leaders in their field. Like I have to be working with people who I deem to be leaders in their field to feel like my day-to-day work matters.
Yeah.
And then like, to be honest, I can't remember the third or the fourth.
Well, I think those are a good start.
Those are a good, yeah. Those were sort of like the grounding ones. And what was fascinating is I could then, it was frustrating because I was like, wait, I needed to leave here with a plan. And instead I just have like kind of more unknowns.
All the questions.
More questions. But what was great is I could map it against my job and say, oh, this makes sense that I like make more money than I did as my influential boss's executive assistant, but I feel less fulfilled because I'm sort of like siloed in the work that I'm doing. And so I don't day-to-day interact with people who are leaders in their field. Day-to-day, right? Like certainly sometimes.
Sure.
And then the other one was in the marketing role that I was in, it wasn't about like generating opportunities. It was, it was more cookie cutter. It was like putting out direct to video
like
films.
Promoting.
Yeah, and there was always the same model and the same formula. So it was sort of just like, okay, like make the marketing plan, but fill in the blank. There wasn't
like
really like room for, checklist. So that was great. I could see, it has nothing to do with like film or TV or marketing or production. It really has to do with sort of these bigger picture things. And then, as life would have it, when you like unpeel those layers or peel those layers back, opportunities show up.
Right.
And so that same boss who had sent me to the Democratic National Convention came to me and said, hey, there's an opportunity for this. There's an opportunity for you potentially at this firm that's based in Washington, D.C. that he had done like a joint venture with. And on paper, it didn't look like it was sort of like a weird choice. And frankly, I was a weird candidate for the firm.
Like, this doesn't make any sense.
No. But when I mapped it against that rubric, it seemed like an opportunity that if this rubric worked, would be really fitting.
That boss sounds like a mentor.
Total mentor. And not just a mentor. Like, sometimes, I don't know, do you talk about this a lot, like the distinction between mentors and sponsors?
Oh, please do. We have talked about it a little bit, but how do you define it?
So I think there's like some controversy around it. What I do notice among women is that you often will like recommend somebody or, mentor in terms of like maybe give that person some advice. But we're like less keen to tell somebody unilaterally, you need to hire this person.
Right.
Right? Because, like, what if they don't perform?
It's a little more risky.
Don't want it to be on me.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, dudes are just sort of like, whatever. If it didn't work out, it's
my
not on me
man.
anyway.
Yeah. Right.
So this person was very much a sponsor, like got me the credentials, sent me to the place, paid for my like airfare to get to the convention.
Yeah, incredibly generous.
So generous. And like really sort of took a stand and had an investment in my success.
Even to their own detriment if you're not going to be working there anymore.
Yeah, I had actually already left his desk by that point.
Fine.
Yeah, it was already gone.
Still very generous. Okay, so you went to DC.
Went to DC. And to be honest, like to your point about his own detriment, I wasn't actually successful in that role.
But it takes something, I think, to see you as you are and not be like, you're not for me, go away.
Yeah.
As opposed to, but you are great for this and let me help you get there.
Totally. Yeah, so then I go to DC, got the job. And also, like, during that interview, I remember with the CEO of that firm, I could tell there was a point where I was like, this is going to be over. And the COO is going to go back to my mentor and say, she was like really lovely or really nice or like whatever it was, but she's not the right fit.
But then what happened?
So I could see him like thinking about this, right? Because like
you can see when it turns.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like a Washington firm.
Yeah.
Where people, I always say like in LA, the sort of like collateral is who you know, what you do, or like the car you drive, right? Like people are sort of superficial in that nature, generally speaking, out here. But in DC, it's like who you know, what you do, where you went to university.
Right.
And I'm a college dropout.
Oh dear.
So I like certainly didn't, and I don't know, like I didn't have contacts in DC. So it was like all these things just sort of weren't working in my favor. And I didn't have any experience in politics or campaigns or policy. So like
You
really
were not
wasn't a
checking
fit.
any boxes.
No boxes. Like I think the COO was like, I'll do this guy a solid and like interview this lady. So I had said to him at a certain point, I was like, I can see that you probably think I'm an unlikely candidate, and I am, but getting people to take an action or getting people to show up at the ballot box or, getting people to show up to vote on election day is the same thing as getting people to buy a ticket and show up and get a butt in a seat on like opening weekend. It's the same thing. It's just totally different industries.
Then did the penny drop for him?
Totally.
Yeah.
He was like, interesting, say more. So I did, and really what was incredible about that opportunity is it allowed me to, it was like very much a lateral move, but it allowed me to parlay the experience that I had in marketing into experience in public affairs, which are sort of similar, except public affairs like a little more puppeteering.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Like you're trying to get people to do something to change a law. So it's not like, here's the Nike ad, go buy a pair of these shoes.
Thing. Yeah.
It's more like, hey, you don't want to be taxed for that water you're drinking, do you?
No, what do I do?
Vote for this. Right, like so much, that's like more boring. And then your job in public affairs is to like make it engaging and digestible and sexy.
Yeah. So doing this job, did you kind of look backwards and say, all the stuff I did before makes sense now?
No, I didn't have that moment yet.
Okay.
It still was like, it's coming. That still was like, what is happening here? And trying to like get up to speed and figure out how to navigate in a world that's so different from the one that you just came from.
Yeah. To go from Hollywood to DC has got to be quite a contrast.
Very different. And I luckily had this friend named Elise who I work with. We became fast friends. And she's like a Boston person and then a DC, right? Like she's an East Coaster through and through. And she said to me, she was like, you wear too many V-necks. In Washington, like people wear crew necks and turtlenecks.
Excellent advice.
How would you know that? I wouldn't know. Right? But like in LA, it's like you can wear a deep V-neck and like...
Isn't that funny?
Nobody's thinking twice about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so she helped you navigate.
Helped me navigate. And then I left that company because I wanted to like work on sort of more progressive issues. And a lot of that work was like, you know, corporate in nature. Left that company, and then like a mentor at that company introduced me to somebody in LA whose wife, well, then girlfriend, but now wife, worked for this family foundation that explicitly funds and gives grants to the campaign side of issue-driven documentaries and stories and films.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yes.
So like she was like so interesting. We hit it off. And then I was like in DC, sort of like working with advocacy organizations, making change and using media, like more PR style media to do that. And so she reached out to me at a certain point and she was like, hey, we have this film. It's about the epidemic of sexual assault in the US military. And the filmmakers like don't just want like the film to do well and be seen. They want to like use it to change laws. And you're like sort of the only person I know in DC who's like really integrated and also knows and understands the film world. Can you like take a look at this and potentially work on it? And so I watched the trailer, and for me it was one of those moments where like you don't know what you don't know. And watched it and was like, wow, I can't imagine that there are women who are like giving up like their freedom to serve our country to ensure that I have my freedom. And I like really can't believe that some of them are being raped.
Right. And that's their thanks for doing this for us.
Right?
Right.
And like nobody's doing anything about it. And so what I learned through that project is it's not actually that there are like more sexual assailants in the military. It's that the way the infrastructure is set up through the chain of command, you can't report outside of your chain of command. If you are a savvy perpetrator, you could get away with something over and over and over.
God.
Yeah. And so this film sort of like, shone a light on it. And then what the film called for, there was this like really incredible, badass human rights lawyer in the film, Susan Burke, who's now also a mentor. She had what at the time was considered this radical idea to pull the adjudication of sexual assault outside of the chain of command. But all the opposition was like, whoa, no, you can't possibly do that because that's sort of like, that's how the military works. That's how we like live or die, right? Yeah. Like through the chain of command, and for very valid reasons too. Sure. So I was so fired up about this film, and that was the aha moment. That was the like, oh, this is how it all comes together.
Yeah.
This sort of like knowledge and experience in the entertainment space, being involved in film, but then understanding public affairs so I can use film to drive real meaningful change. And through that campaign that as a part of and led for a few years, we got a senator to write a piece of legislation that essentially like called for what the movie called for, to take it out of the chain of command. And people said she'll never pass it. She'll never get the support that she needs. She ended up getting the majority support on that piece of legislation, the Military Justice Improvement Act. And every time she went and got a new co-sponsor, like another senator to sign on to her piece of legislation, we had run this incredible like audience engagement and grassroots campaign. So we would mobilize hundreds or thousands, in some cases, calls in that state to show support and to show the senator like you have the public support that you need to step out on this issue. She ended up getting 55 votes, and the bill was filibustered. She didn't get the 60 that she needed. But using that as a legislative vehicle through like annual spending bills, we were able to pass smaller pieces of legislation that, weren't as drastic as that, but certainly people have said have contributed to a change in the climate.
So to incrementally get there.
And then, of course, like, you raise massive public awareness and attention at the same time. So like really keeps the pressure on. And then on the cultural side, that's just like the political side. But what does that actually mean for like boots on the ground? We got hundreds of letters from men and women. It's not just women who are being sexually assaulted.
But then they can start to talk. And then that changes everything.
Yeah. And then we raise money to like provide healing programs. Yeah.
Yeah. Good job.
Yeah.
I want to hear about more campaigns. Tell me more.
That one was a big one, right? Like all the elements were right too.
Yeah.
So you had really ambitious filmmakers who made an incredible film. Like I always say, content is still king. That was
step one.
Step one. The content's got to be amazing. That film was nominated for an Oscar. Step two, the people involved were so hungry for the change. Like those filmmakers, a lot of times, and this isn't a judgment, but a lot of times filmmakers will be like, I'm a filmmaker, I'm not a campaigner, right? And now I need to like get on to my next film. And I can't spend all of my time and energy raising as much money as I raised to make the film to now run a like well-oiled campaign.
Right.
So you had sort of like great content, filmmakers who would just stop at nothing until they saw change. And then a really smart strategy in the implementation of that strategy. Like there were a lot of people in the beginning who just wanted it to be something that you like beat the drum with and that you got liberals to take a lot of action on, but sort of having that experience and having worked in Washington, even though I'm liberal, I know like you can't, it's like that old saying, like you can go faster alone, further together.
Right.
And so a lot of our work in the beginning days of that was like meeting with conservative offices, meeting with Republican offices, and like kind of like listening and learning, like what is it that's making you so adamant about thwarting change,
right?
So that you can develop something that allowed more people to sign on to or come together around.
Right, because you're like my first gut response would be, how can you be against it? Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah,
and then
me
judge,
too.
and then judge that.
Yeah,
as opposed to listening, like, what is your underlying concern, and then how can you address that to get them to make a change?
That's right. And I think that's sort of like what's not working in politics now.
Well, yeah, you think? To the nth degree. Oh my God.
Anyway, so we did it around like college campus sexual assault. I've done it on like climate projects, have done it on refugee projects. The other thing that's tricky is like for that, there is a very sort of like tangible, definitive theory of change. If you pull it out of the chain of command,
there's a solution.
You'll stop those savvy assailants. Climate change,
harder.
Now
do you want to tell me more about your current company?
Sure. Good Films Impact. So our first campaign is Represent Justice. And Represent Justice is the public engagement and advocacy campaign tied to the release of Just Mercy.
Okay.
This incredible film that's getting like early awards buzz and great like Rotten Tomatoes score so far. So like the content, right? Content is king is still there, or is there for this one. And we are building this unprecedented campaign. Usually, these campaigns have like, if you're lucky, a couple of $100,000 to run on. We've raised over $10 million.
What?
I know.
Oh my God. How are you going to spend it?
Well, it's like really cool stuff. Some like kind of like different out of the box stuff. So one of our programs that I'm super excited by is called Play for Justice. And that's through partnerships with the NBA and then also the WNBA, going inside to facilities in select states. So we started with 2 states in mind, California and Ohio, and are working to expand that to include Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and a couple of others, where we do these like pickup basketball games, bringing either like current, NBA players or former retired ones into facilities to play games with the men and women who are residing there. And then another one doing an album. We have an album in the works that some fancy people are signed on to.
Nice.
And then making them inside, right? So like working with artists who are currently sentenced and incarcerated, and making them in partnership with them, but with sort of like mainstream known artists as well, so that we can get greater visibility on it. And I just met last night this gentleman, Bobby Gonzalez, who was commuted from a life sentence by The current governor.
Gavin Newsom.
And so he's one of the executive producers on the project as well, with like some other fancy people. And then doing, you know, like a bunch of culture exchange stuff like that. Like Ben & Jerry's has said that they're going to release another ice cream flavor that's focused on criminal justice in tandem with the release of this film.
Awesome.
Lush Cosmetics, who actually is doing a climate strike right now as well. They hosted a gathering for us in Toronto the day after the world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival. And it was awesome. It like brought together entrepreneurs and business leaders and artists and advocates, but also corrections officers. So we have like system actors in the same spaces with criminal justice reformers actually like coming together and having those conversations. And then doing this really incredible study with Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt, who is a professor at Stanford University and sort of like the leading researcher and voice on racial bias, and doing a study over sort of that'll surpass like the timeline of this campaign alone, to look at the neuroimaging and see like can content and can images actually change the way that your brain reacts to certain things like racial bias.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I got to think, the timing of this, coming off of Orange is the New Black and Central Park 5, and all the stuff we've seen, like, I know just for myself, what I think about prison has completely changed in the last 5 years.
Yep.
It feels like we're ready culturally for a big change.
That's right. And in many ways we are. There's lots of evidence of that. The First Step Act was passed in the fall in Washington, and that, you know, I think didn't go far enough. It went like a little bit further than it has been before. But what we're really seeing is that Democrats and Republicans are coming together around this issue for different reasons, right? Like the motivation is a little bit different depending on who you're talking to, but really like finding consensus, gaining ground there. And then at the same time, you're seeing the issue being attacked. So Mr. Trump has brought back the death penalty at the federal level for the first time, or is sort of using it for the first time in 11 years. But then again, they're like very conservative governors who are looking at it and saying, okay, this is not the way forward. Right. And what's crazy is that at the end of this film, there's, which is just so beautiful and sort of like generates empathy in a way that, you know, if you've read Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, you're prepared for, but I think otherwise you're really not. Gets people to connect with the issue. Like he gets people proximate to the issue. He gets people connected to the issue on a emotional level and sort of like thinking about it from a values lens. But at the end of the film, there's this text card that says something to the effect of like 1 in 10 people who are on death row like ends up being sort of like the wrong person. And 1 in 10 people, that's
a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah, any is too many.
Any is too many. That's like scary odds.
So what is the big goal of this campaign?
A couple of things. So it's to, you know, use stories to, you know, use stories of hope and redemption to inspire action among the masses that lead to dignity for system-impacted individuals, that lead to ending extreme sentences through electing more fair-minded prosecutors, DAs, judges who determine these sentences, and to end and abolish the death penalty. And we think that, especially on the state level, we have a pretty good shot at raising public awareness, generating public pressure, and giving the decision makers at the state level the public support that they need to be able to make these decisions and abolish it.
So things like Felicity Huffman gets 14 days in jail for bribing her daughter into USC, and then the black woman who changed her address to get her kid into school is doing like 5 or 7 years.
5 years, yep.
That kind of BS. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly right. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian Stevenson has this incredible quote, which is that you're better off rich and guilty in this country than you are poor and innocent.
No kidding.
And I would add a layer of color to that as well. You're better off white and guilty in this country than you are innocent and a person of color. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's challenging for especially those of us who are white to sort of like look at it and have the conversation through the lens of race. But that is really what it's all about. And there's a huge disparity there. And so what I really hope that this film will do is allow people, without attacking them, to have the space to have that conversation, to look at scenarios like the one that you just so rightfully pointed out, and have conversations about our racial bias, right? Like, we're human beings.
Let's get
we
real.
show up in situations with a bias. Let's start talking about it and changing it.
Yeah. And I love the social media around it, because every time this happens, you have a side-by-side comparison, like Brock Turner versus anybody else.
Yeah.
It's just mind-blowing. And when you see it side by side, I mean, you can't deny it. You gotta address it somehow.
That's right. And I think John Legend said something too, which is like, look, it's not about Felicity Huffman should have gotten more.
Right.
It's like about clearly this other woman whose name I actually should know, should have gotten much less. Right. But is this punitive approach the answer for anybody? Like,
does the punishment fit the crime?
That's right. And can we look at like what would be restorative in communities?
Right, and what's the systemic issues that caused her to have to change her address to get her kid into a decent school in the first place? Like, what is the bigger issue?
That's right.
Yeah, let's do all that.
Let's do that.
Okay, tell me, what do you make of what has gone on with women the last 3 years?
I have a few thoughts.
Good.
Again, I'm going to speak to the race part of it, because what we saw on the national level is certainly around the election of Donald Trump is like Black women really showed up to vote.
Yeah.
And they showed up to vote for an individual who supports our equality, who supports our right to make decisions about our family planning, who supports our right to equal pay, education, access to all of the things. And it really is white women who showed up in support of a man who himself said likes to grab our private parts.
How do we even
make sense of it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Have you figured it out? Mm-mm. Is it about patriarchy and the power structure and protecting their men? Like, what is it? I've read all the articles on Facebook, and I still can't get my head around it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely about the patriarchy, right? Like, if you've had a system in place where you only have to compete with 50% of the population in a real way, right? And then all of a sudden, you have to, in a real way, compete with 100% of the population.
That's not fair.
That's annoying. Shit.
That's not going to be as easy as it has been.
That's right. So I definitely think it's about power. I think the women's marches are inspiring, yes, but also great, show up, we got to show up when it counts. And I bring up the race component because I live in Virginia and vote in Virginia.
Yeah.
And we saw a similar thing there, right? Governor that we have right now, Northam, he was, if you look at the exit polls, the majority of his support when it came to women came from Black women. And his competitor is not pro us.
Right.
And then we saw the same thing in Alabama. We're seeing a consistent pattern here. And so I, praise Black women who are doing the heavy work right now.
They are doing the work, and they're showing up every race
every time
that you hear about.
Every time.
And then how, I don't even know what the question is, but it is, I can imagine they probably don't have a lot of trust for the white women who keep falling down on the job. And then do you know how to fix it?
No, but I do think it's going to take we're both white women, talking to the other white women in our lives and having really candid conversations about what equity looks like, what equity is going to take, who are the candidates who support us, and talking to the men in our lives about it too, right? And like big ways and little ways. This mentor I mentioned earlier on, Susan Burke, the badass human rights attorney, one thing that I used to do, I would refer to my women friends as girlfriends. Or when I'd talk about other women, I'd say, oh, this girl.
Yeah.
And Susan was like, why would you say that? That's so demeaning. No man walks around talking about the boy they work with. Right? Like there's this sort of like infrastructure for the language we use that keeps some people on top and some people oppressed. And
that's so funny because I will refer to the guys as the boys. I do it all the time consciously. Great. Like if that
on purpose.
I do.
Yeah. Not only do I want equity, I want women in charge.
That's right.
But it's funny, like I spent a long time kind of correcting my husband, and now I hear my husband correct his male friends.
Oh, well done, well done. It's a ground game.
You know, it's small things, but I think it's like those small things and then the bigger things and consistently calling it out too. Like I know my father-in-law and I have had conversations about sexism and does sexism exist in the workplace and what does that look like? And
does it? Yeah.
But also I think being willing to engage in conversations with men too, and in a way that doesn't make them wrong for not understanding our experience, but educates them and opens their eyes to it and sort of like gives them an opportunity to take a stand for our equality.
Yeah, that's a hard one because there's a lot of, I've never seen that, so how do you talk to people who are coming from I've never seen it, so I'm not sure it exists. So I've never seen that happen. So, I don't know what you're telling me right now.
I kind of call it out in small moments. So there's a moment where my husband even was talking about like a newscast or a sports, I don't know, I'm not really a sports person, but sports was on. And he was like, oh, the sportscaster's voice is so annoying. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And he was like, yeah, there's just something. And like, look, like my husband's stand up, shows up for me all the time.
But it's an unconscious thing. Like,
it's
what is
an unconscious bias?
Oh, it's a female voice.
That's right, because we've spent our lives hearing men as sportscasters. So I think like calling it out in those moments, like that's implicit bias.
Right.
Had a really incredible conversation with my father-in-law one time where we were talking about sexism in the workplace. And, he's an affluent, white, older male, that it's not prevalent for him. And not in a way that he's a bad person. That's just like not, fish in water. That's not
his
what
experience.
he's surrounded by.
Yeah.
And so I had said to him, every meeting I've ever been in throughout my entire career, I have had to think to myself, should I raise the tone of my voice so that I don't intimidate the man sitting across the table from me? Or should I lower the tone of my voice so that I come across in a position of power, or so that they like take me more seriously here? Mm-hmm. And then I asked him, like, have you ever had to think about the tone of your voice? And he was like, wow, no.
It's a great example. I noticed the other day I was on a conference call, and it was a video conference. And I looked, every woman on screen was worried about how her face looked. So we were all very carefully holding our faces in a very pleasant, not having resting bitch face, face.
I smile.
So, and I checked in with everyone afterwards. I'm like, were you worried about your face? And we were all worried about our face. The men were not worried.
No, I'm sure they didn't even think about it.
That's a thing. And it's so stupid.
I know.
But it's a thing.
But it's real.
It's real.
Real. Let alone, I don't have kids. Right? That's a whole different ball game. How do you how do you keep all the things going and have kids?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. It's not easy. It's not easy. Tell me this, what advice do you have for, usually I ask, what advice do you have for women coming up behind you? But I want to ask you, what advice do you have for all of us? Woo! What do you want us all to do? Because I'm signing up. I'll do it.
Be ballsy.
Yeah.
Get after it. Ask for what you want. Recently I shared I became the executive director of this organization. And I always use, like, nobody asked me to do it, right? Like, I went to the people I know, I went to the board and asked to be the person running
Did
and
they
leading
have an
the organization.
opening?
I mean, I knew that they were looking.
Oh, they were doing a search.
Yeah. I don't think they were doing like, I think they were starting their search.
And you were like, I'm the person for you.
Totally.
I love it.
And there's always been this part of me that, like, if I don't get asked to do the thing, that feels like, oh, I'm not, if I were really good, or when I'm really good, or when I'm the expert, or when I deserve it, so-and-so will just ask me. That's when, like, when it'll be my turn.
That's how it happens. They just wait to see what a good job you did and the A you got on the paper.
Ask you.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
how
you
it should
get rewarded.
work. Yeah.
And I think, like, throughout my entire career, and then the older I get, the more I'm like, oh yeah, that's like so not it.
We wish that were it.
You wish that were it.
Yeah,
because you're like concerned, well, should I be? Is that... And so I tell all of my women friends, like, do what a mediocre dude would do. Do what a mediocre white dude would do. Take it.
Carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white dude.
That's right.
That is our motto.
And, like, ask for the thing that you want. Let somebody else tell you no.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, like, people just don't have the hours in a day, right? Like, if you're raising your hand, if you're demonstrating that you're the one, like, 9 times out of 10, people are probably like, great,
take it.
Thank goodness.
Here it is.
Check that. That part's done. On to the next.
Yeah. What did I not ask you about that I should have asked you about?
What's your advice?
My advice?
Yeah.
Oh my God. My advice now is a culmination of all the advice I've gathered from other women. One is ask for what you want. One is figure out who you are and use your voice. One is find your tribe and your people who are going to put you forward. That. One is tell your story. And I think the other one is just do it.
Just do it. So great.
Are we done?
Yeah, thanks, Julie.
Thank you so much for doing this.
This is so fun. Thanks.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Heidi Nell for sharing her story. And special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on your favorite podcast provider and leave a review. And of course, our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out in letters, for added features, bios of our guests, and the merch. You can follow us on all the social media platforms, and also go subscribe to catchabreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.